Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to dive deep and unlock the code of communication. For any of us who teach, understanding this code is pretty much the key to helping every student learn to read, write, and really just thrive. So let's get into it. This is really the big question, isn't it? How do we guide our students as they piece together these abstract sounds and symbols and help them transform marks on a page into this incredible world of stories and ideas? Let's break down the code they need to learn. All right, so to crack any code, you've got to know what it's made of. Let's start with the 5 fundamental building blocks of language. Okay, first up, there's this really crucial distinction we need to make. Receptive language is all about understanding what we hear or read. Expressive language is about producing it, speaking or writing. And here's the thing you've got to remember. A kid's receptive skills, they almost always outpace their expressive ones. They understand so much more than they can often say. So from the big picture of language, let's zoom way in to its tiniest parts, the sounds. This is phonology. Every single word is built from these individual sounds called phonemes. So the word sick, for example, has 3, s, I, and k. And why is this so critical? Well, if a student can't hear those individual sounds, there's just no way they can connect them to the letters on a page. It's the absolute bedrock of learning to read. Okay, so we've got the sounds. Now we need to give them meaning. And that's where semantics comes in. It's not just about knowing a word, but understanding all its different shades of meaning. Take the word bug. To an exterminator, it's an insect. To a spy, it's a listening device. Context is everything. All right, we have meaningful words. Now we need some rules to put them together, right? That's grammar. A huge part of this is syntax, which is just a fancy word for word order. Think about it. Steve is here now. Totally makes sense. Steve here is now. Same words, but it's just gibberish. That syntax is like the invisible architecture holding our sentences together. And that actually leads us perfectly into our next building block. Pragmatics. This is all about those unwritten social rules of communication. The phrase, "Why don't you visit me?" could be a super friendly invitation or a pretty better complaint. The words are exactly the same. The only thing that changes is the tone, the context, the pragmatics. And finally, we've got orthography. This is the part where we actually translate all of this spoken stuff into writing. It's basically the rule book for spelling, punctuation, and all that good stuff that lets us turn sounds into a written code that anyone can understand. So, there you have it, the basic building blocks. But what happens when a student is really struggling with one or more of these pieces of the code? Let's take a look at some of the common ways communication can break down. Well, you can see speech impairments, which mostly hit that expressive language side of things. They generally fall into 4 big categories. These can be anything from physical challenges in just forming the words, which are motor speech disorders, to issues with the rhythm and flow of speech, like stuttering. A super common example you've probably heard is something called substitution. When a child says right instead of right, they're just swapping out a sound that's tough for them with one that's a little bit easier to make. It's a very common error, and a lot of kids just naturally grow out of it. Now, when we're talking about fluency, it's really important to know the difference between stuttering and cluttering. See, a person who stutters knows exactly what they want to say, but they have trouble getting the words out. But with cluttering, a person often speaks way too fast, and their thoughts might be a bit disorganized, which affects their fluency. And of course, we have to talk about dyslexia. It's a learning disability that impacts reading for people with totally normal intelligence. Now, the symptoms can vary, but at its heart, it's this profound challenge with processing the written code, specifically connecting sounds to the letters that represent them. Let me be super clear about this. This has absolutely nothing to do with a student's intelligence. It's just a different wiring in the brain's language centers. Okay, so we've looked at the challenges. Let's flip the script and talk about what really matters, the solutions. What are the proven strategies and tools we can actually use to support every single student on their literacy journey? Learning to read isn't like flipping a switch. It's a journey with a few key stages. It all starts with pre-reading, where a child just loves listening to stories. Then it moves into learning to read, where they're actively sounding out words. After that, we hit transitional reading, where their fluency starts to take off. And finally, the big goal, reading to learn, where reading becomes a powerful tool for gaining knowledge. And it's the same thing with writing. It's not this one and done thing. It's a whole process. This 5-step cycle, from brainstorming to sharing the final piece, it helps students organize their thoughts and make their work better and better. It really drives home that writing is something you work on and revisit, not just something you finish. So how do we build up those core skills? Honestly, it can be surprisingly simple. Just a quick activity like asking, hey, do peak and week rhyme? That's a really powerful way to build what we call phonological skills. It's quick, it's easy, and it really works. And we can get even more granular with phonemic awareness. Try this one. How many sounds do you hear in the word six? The answer's not 3, by the way. It's 4. S, I, k, s. An exercise like this literally trains a student's ear to hear those tiny units of sound, which is just absolutely essential for decoding words on a page. Look, for students who face bigger challenges, assistive technology can be a total game changer. We're talking about things like screen readers, communication boards. These aren't just little helpers. They are lifelines. They are gateways that ensure every single student gets a voice and can be part of the learning conversation. At the end of the day, our job isn't just about teaching the mechanics, right? It's about something so much bigger. It's about fostering a real, genuine, lasting love for it all. Let's look at the bigger picture. So when we're talking about interventions, there are basically 2 main flavors. You've got directive interventions, which are really structured. Think of a speech therapist working on very specific sounds. And then you have naturalistic interventions, which are more about using everyday moments to learn. But you know what? The most effective strategies, they're almost always a mix of both, combining that structured practice with real, interest-driven communication. And this right here is what I really want you to walk away with. Literacy is not some extra subject we tack on. It's not an add-on. The ability to read, write, and think critically is the foundation for learning in science, in history, in math, in every single subject. It's the master key that unlocks everything else. So, I'm going to leave you with this thought. We've talked about the code, the challenges, the strategies, the whole shebang. But the final piece of the puzzle, the real question is this. Beyond all the mechanics, how do we spark that fire? How do we make sure our students don't just learn how to read, but actually become readers for life?